Good afternoon, lower sixth. So, first two units of the lower sixth. So we're looking at unit 2.1.1 and 2, internal and external sources of finance. Read something about Aldi's the other day. They're clearly doing very well, especially with our cost of living crisis. And we can see that they are looking to open up another 23 stores, and this will give them a massive 1,500 stores. So well done to the German discounters, probably at the expense of Asda's debt-ridden takeover, hey, but never mind, good for them. So where's the money coming from? Well, let's quickly remind ourselves of some of the things that we've got in class in context with this question. So we've looked at those internal and external sources of finance, and we're just going through those at the moment. And clearly we've got things like owner's capital. So this could be the personal savings. We would normally think of this as the shareholders' personal money going in, normally with smaller businesses. And more important for Aldi's is going to be their retained profits. So I'm going to show you a case study in a little while. You're going to pause the video, you're going to go through it, and you're going to have a look to see how much retained profits they've got. And also you're going to think about how much is it going to cost them to open up these other 23 stores. Now 23 doesn't seem a lot, but it's not just the 23 stores. It's all the recruitment, it's the training, it's the extra logistics, it's the supply chain. In the case study, it mentions one of their strategic partners and how much money they might be supporting Aldi's with. And maybe they've got a vested interest, because it's probably where Aldi's buy most of their fruit, veg and stuff like that from. Now, sale of assets, really this case study is about expansion. So you wouldn't have thought that Aldi's are going to sell anything. And the case study doesn't mention sale of assets. So we wouldn't really mention it in our essays. However, this is a 12 marker, and with 12s and 20 markers, with those extended arguments, sometimes pupils, great pupils that are up to date with current affairs, might bring in their own knowledge. And this could be the example, for example, in Buckingham, the centre of existence, Aldi's are closing one of their stores because it's not making them enough profit, and they're going to open up another one somewhere else. So it could be that we look out for that sort of example. But in this case study, there's no evidence of sales of assets. So in the essay we're going to do, we are not going to mention it. Those external sources of finance, we would think about them and we would look for evidence in the case study. Well, I'm sure Aldi's have got lots of friends and family, but let's face it, they are a massive multinational corporation. They might get money from shareholders. There might be something like that, but we're not looking at friends and family. This is not a small limited company. They might get some money from the bank. Now, this could be our counter argument to a question about retained profits, for example. We would compare it to the alternatives. Retained profit, instant access, it's their money, they can decide what they want to do with it within reason. And compared to a bank loan where you have to repay it over the years and you pay interest, Aldi's are a discounter. If the cost of operating the company is increased because of bank repayments and interest loans, will they be able to continue to pass on those cost savings to their customers? Maybe, maybe not. Sounds good in an essay. Are we really going to look at peer-to-peer and crowdfunding? I don't think so. It's not me trying to come up with a silly idea on one of the crowdfunding platforms, even though some of those crowdfunding ideas do work out really well. Thank goodness for Brewdog. Thank you, Brewdog. And are we going with business angels? Well, no, because this is 23 new stores. I'm guessing ballpark figure, £5 million each, maybe £10 million each. Then infrastructure improvements. They're not going to go to a business angel and ask one of the Dragon's Den lot to say, will you give me 100 grand? We're thinking about millions, maybe venture capital, maybe other businesses. Yeah, so actually I'm putting ticks next to those when it should be crosses. And realistically, other businesses, well, maybe this is in the case study as one of their strategic partners. So we've actually got lots to think about linked into what we're learning in class. Those methods of finance could be our counter arguments. Loans, maybe. Releasing new shares, possibly. Venture capital, well, didn't work out well for Asda, did it? Which is why Asda are not passing on all those cost savings. The Asda price guarantee ain't what it used to be, hence why they've got problems. So maybe in this case, they don't want venture capital, even though it is an option. An overdraft, don't be silly. They're not going to take a couple of £1 million overdraft, are they? Especially with those high interest rates we tend to see with short-term borrowing. Leasing, well, maybe. They might lease the building from a pension fund that built the building. They might lease some of their equipment. So maybe we could look out for that. Trade credit, well, really that's a short-term option, short to medium, depending on your credit terms. And maybe a grant. I don't think the UK government, especially the new UK government, are going to say, do you know what, we really need more supermarkets. Let's not pay the nurses a pay rise and let's give the German supermarkets some money. So that is a ridiculous proposition, but it's in the spec. I think the key point here is don't mention it unless it's in the case study, really. And just because you remember what grants and peer-to-peer funding are doesn't mean it belongs in your essay. Let's quickly look at this question and we can plan this, can't we? So what we've got here is our hook. We've got the likely importance, and this is a 12 marker. So if we want perfect balance, maybe we're looking for it is important. However, something else might be more important. It isn't the most important thing. However, it might be blooming important, all linked to their business aims and objectives. Now, before we even go to the case study, we know what the business aims and objectives are because they want to, second part of the hook, likely importance to the business objective of growing to 1,500 stores. We know this. What are we going to define? Well, we've got retained profits. We will start our essay off with a definition of retained profits and then we will go into the structure. On top of our in favour, however, against, however, we need to answer the question and we need to justify considering the alternative. Well, since this question is about retained profit, the alternative might be not using retained profit. Okay, so we can get that into our answers. We sort of know with this wonderfully complex, not very complex plan, before we even read the case study, we know what we're looking for. Plan before you go to the case study, kids, because it will help you. And then when you find your evidence, go and write your essay. I would like you to pause your video. I would like you to go through this relatively in-depth case study that I didn't steal from Times and identify knowledge and application. We're mainly looking for application here, but we're looking for links into those knowledge, which sources of finance, for example. Okay, so we can see that they are making more money. Sales have increased by that to that. You could take one number away from another if you want to show off how brilliant you are at maths. So we understand that things are getting better, for example. Okay, pause the video, identify some bits of evidence, and then we'll quickly walk through some of the stuff. Did you pause the video? Probably not. So looking at some of these things, we're looking for some evidence from the case study. And remember, we need advantages, disadvantages for all of it. I've put owner capital and retained profit with the same advantages and disadvantages. Email me if you think I'm wrong, but probably not. So from this, we have got owner's capital. We know that they have been around for a while and it's not a saving, it's not small business. We're going to ignore personal savings and stuff like that, really. Okay, but they might have capital that they can draw upon. You might see this in the loan accounts or the assets. But realistically, this is a very profitable company at the moment. And we can see we have a figure that we could use. If you see numbers in a case study, use it in your essay, hopefully do some basic maths, okay? Now, what we've got down here is we've got £800 million worth of expansion, and we've got the profits. Last time I checked, this figure is bigger than that figure, so there is a gap. So maybe that's part of our argument in an essay, by the way, that maybe they could use retained profits, but they might need to do some borrowing as well. Okay, or if you're only using retained profits, then maybe you can't build all of your 23 stores at the same time, and this is slower expansion, leaving it open for Lidl's to open up some of their supermarkets. So the advantages of these is you don't have to pay it back. There are no interest rate payments. And they can control all of this, because if sometimes when you borrow money from external areas, people, banks, institutions, pension funds, it comes with some limitations, restrictions on the funding. Now, the disadvantages are you can only spend it once. There might not be enough there. And also, if you've got retained profits, it can actually result in improved liquidity ratios, which makes you more attractive for people to invest in you. So if you were looking at other sources of finance, if you suddenly spent all of your retained profits and had nothing in the bank, then where's your money coming from if you don't quite hit your sales forecast, for example? Or, more likely, the cost of your expansion is more than that 800 million quid. Go and read an article about HS2 and why they've cancelled most of it. And most of it is just poor planning and builders going over budget. So sale of assets, yes, they could sell their supermarkets. And there's a little bit of my own knowledge living in this part of the world. However, realistically, they're just going to be acquiring assets. If I'm going to talk about this, I'm not going to talk about it much. And just because you know a golden fact doesn't mean it will take over the case study. I've given you a very big case study, more than you would have in an exam paper. There's enough evidence there. You probably don't need sale of assets. Immediate cash without taking on debt, but the problem is if you sell all your critical assets off, you might have to buy some more in the future. They might even be more expensive. And if they're critical to your expansion, as in they sell their Buckingham store and don't replace it, and suddenly Buckingham becomes some sort of massive metropolis, then that might not be good. It might not help them reach their expansion plans. So we could talk about crowdfunding and peer-to-peer funding, but let's face it, it's not relevant. We will move on. We've got banks. This is an alternative one. This is a big profitable company. Banks will want to loan them money. They are definitely a low-risk borrower because they've got £500 million worth of profits. Banks will fall over themselves to loan them money at a very good rate because there's a high chance that they're going to get this back. Low interest rates, low risk loans, and hopefully Aldi's will pay it back and also borrow more money in the future if they want to expand through external stuff, finance as well. So yes, it's access to large sums of money. Well, they've already got £500 million. Maybe they need more. How much more? Well, we know they need £800 million, not just for the stores, but also for the supply chain and infrastructure. It's great because I can forecast around it, which is great when you're planning sales, profits, and you're communicating with shareholders to manage their expectations. Remember your forms of business. This is a PLC equivalent company. They've got big shareholders, maybe pension funds. They want to know when they're going to get their dividends, and if you can present that in a favourable way, then maybe people like your shares and they don't sell them. Disadvantages are the obvious ones. You take on the debt, you have to repay it, and also there's it increases the value of this loan because you pay interest. If you've got a fluctuating rate of interest rates have recently increased in the UK. They look like they're going back down a bit soon, but we'll see. It could increase even more. And if you think about competitiveness of this company, they are a cost leader, said our good friend Michael Porter, and they want the lowest cost possible so they can pass on that cost saving to their customers, and then hopefully their customers don't go and buy from Tesco's or somewhere else. So other businesses, the case study talks about how they are in partnership with part of their supply chain, and you see these strategic partnerships that are there. So Aldi's will look after this company and they will look after Aldi's. Hopefully everyone makes a small fortune except for us poor buggers that have to buy our groceries that are so expensive. The advantages of this is you've got this strategic relationship together, and maybe we see better trade terms. We shall see. This could help them with the running costs of this expanded network. And remember, this company is going to be selling up to hopefully 1,500 stores. And if Aldi's didn't have the money, then maybe they wouldn't expand and this company would sell less Pink Lady apples, okay, one of Dobby's favourites. Disadvantage is if you get over reliant on your supplier, and it's difficult to have that divorce, to separate, because you need to renegotiate and maybe not as favourable terms. Now, if we're thinking about loans, we've gone through bank loans, we've got the advantages and disadvantages there, and this is without diluting ownership. That's comparing it to, you've got it, selling more shares on the stock market or selling more shares. So actually, we're always comparing to an alternative source of finance. Leasing, that's more about equipment and stuff, not really that important for part of this, not because it's not important, because it's not in the case study. But look out for leasing, because it could be there's a picture in the background here of refrigerators, for example. I'm guessing, it's a big guess, they don't buy them. Okay, they might be on a 5-year lease and they replace them every 5 years. That will come with a service and maintenance contract, and hopefully the fridges are always working, and that way we get refrigerated products instead of pink chicken. Those of you that go to our school will know the joke. Lower upfront costs, all the benefits you've got there over time. It can be a lot more expensive than buying it outright. However, at least you haven't got that initial outlay. Hey, you can spend it on your building your new buildings. Trade credit, well, we've already talked about that in passing, and there's the pros and cons that you can read yourself. And then we are on to our question. So quickly, trying to persuade you to plan, our likely importance is always linked to an aim and objective. Not all questions give you the aim and objective. You'll find those in the case study. But whoever wrote this question was very generous, because here's the second part of the hook. So we know the end of our chains of argument need to be something to do with store expansion or things like that. We know that we need to define retained profits, and we know that this is going to be in context with a budget discounter. Okay, easy peasy question. Obviously, we are aiming for level 4. Level 4 is where we want to be, and it doesn't have to be perfect. If you complete the paper, you get level 4, get 100% on those 4 markers. You're going to get an A, maybe an A star, probably an A star on this year's grade boundaries. We'll see if they get tighter next year. But remember, we need accurate and thorough knowledge throughout. Okay, so it's throughout. It's not just in one paragraph. We need those chains of argument. Now, we need a minimum of 3 chains of argument. The examiners for 12 markers are really probably looking for 5. They don't say that in the standards, but that's what they're thinking about. But 5 is not the magic number. It is what you do with them. So if you can bring in, I mentioned Porter's cost leadership, for example, that could be part of a chain of argument. That's also extra application. If I brought in Buckingham Supermarket as a bit of extra evidence, maybe that helps me with those extended chains of argument. When an examiner reads this, does it sound like a business essay, or is it absolute common sense and cobbled together? Well, welcome to level 3. We need balance. We need those wide-ranging arguments, which is more than 2. And we know the structure up here is there's 2, and actually, if you write that future-orientated justification, we do not write a separate MOPS paragraph, but your justification should really consider the future. If you did that, you've got probably about 5 different arguments, and I'm not very good at maths, but 5's bigger than 2. Is it well contextualized throughout every paragraph, conclusion and justification? If there's quantitative, have you done a bit of maths with it? That would be nice, showing off a little bit that, to be honest with you. But show off if you can do it. This question doesn't say using the data, and if it did, you better do a calculation or they will cap you at level 2, which will make you cry on results day. This question doesn't say using the data, but if you can do maths, do maths. I didn't use maths in this one. I've been a bit naughty. Showing awareness of competing arguments. Well, when you write your justifications properly, comparing the two, well, this isn't a 20 marker, option 1, option 2. So the alternative to using retained profits is probably not using retained profits. And then hopefully we get that supported judgment. Let's see if it's level 4. So retained profits refer to the portion of a company's net earnings that are reinvested in the business rather than distributed as dividends. Okay, yeah, I can cope with that. And if we were marking this in class, we'd stick a cheeky K next to that for knowledge. And then we're going into our first chain of argument. I do like a bit of because leading to resulting in. It's not quite BLT, but we miss off the therefore to save a word. And we are a cost-effective way, a sustainable way to finance its growth without the need for external borrowing of loans. That's a bit more knowledge. You've already had the knowledge marks, Dobby. Maybe you've duplicated your knowledge there, but it doesn't matter as long as you finished it within 15 minutes. This is important because we do like to underline connectives, by the way. Aldi's significant increase in UK's profits, as stated in the case study, indicates that it has a growing pool of retained earnings. So this indicates as a chain of argument as well. This can be used to finance the opening of new stores, which aligns with Aldi's plans to reach a total of 1,500 outlets application by expanding its presence by 23 new locations. More application. Now, that looks like I've done a bit of maths. I haven't. I took it out of the title of the case study. But it's definitely using the numbers, even if we're not really doing much with them. Okay? But at least we know it's 20 new stores. However, I do love a bit of however, because that's my counter argument. Relying solely on retained profits may limit Aldi's capacity to invest in larger scale compared to using external finances, especially if the retained earnings are not sufficient to cover the cost of expanding stores and grocery distribution networks. Oh, I'm out of breath just reading that. That's a bit of a gobful. Now, most of that is abstract straight out of the textbook. And actually, if it wasn't probably for the word grocery there, it would be totally abstract and probably wouldn't impress the examiner too much. Yes, it demonstrates an understanding of the theory, but your howevers must be contextualised. Thank goodness for the word grocery. Using retained profits may limit Aldi's ability to reinvest in rapid expansion, as their profits, though substantial, might not sufficiently fund all of their objectives. However, this is a bit of a repeat. Yeah. Now we're looking at a different argument here. Go back a bit. We're looking for a different argument. We're going to go very careful. We don't just repeat ourselves, or we're going to end up with half marks. I'm hoping that the rest of this paragraph adds a bit more. Despite these the large profits reported, expanding to 1,500 stores, that's a repeat, requires significant capital and technology. Slight different argument, not much. Infrastructure and renovations of existing stores. Well, okay, I'll give you that because that's actually something a bit new. The £536.7 million profits may not fully cover the £800 million investment. Okay, so up here we've got, it's sort of in context with grocery. Yes, that's sort of the argument. Down here we've got some beautiful numbers. It's a shame I've been lazy and not taken one away from the other. And they may need to consider other forms of finance to meet these costs. It is a similar argument though. However, hold on, examiner, here comes the counter-argument. If Aldi avoids using retained profits and turns to external sources such as bank loans, they would incur interest costs, potentially financial risks, which may strain the company's profitability in the long term or force them into increasing prices in the supermarkets. bit of application, which might damage their cost leadership. We do love a bit of Porters, thank you Michael, as the UK's cheapest supermarket. More application. Okay, so the question's about expansion and not so much retaining its competitive advantage, by the way. So we have to ask ourselves, is this about expanding the 23 stores? Okay, well, it sort of is, and it's going off on other things. I'm hoping the conclusion wraps it up nicely. In conclusion, retained profits are likely to be important. We have just answered the question. Wow. Objective, blah, 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 towards the stuff that we've already mentioned 3 times. Justification, I tend to write in a separate paragraph because it actually makes me remember to write it instead of just repeating what I've already done. You've had the marks already, you won't get marks for repeating. So it's very important you understand that. Without the use of retained profits, Aldi could be forced to rely entirely on external finances, which is a repeat, sort of, from what we've said earlier. Okay, making retained profits even more attractive than loans. That to me is abstract waffle, doesn't really add a lot. That does answer the question. It is fully contextualized. The whole answer is sort of focused on the expansion. We've got some nice stuff there. So, is it accurate knowledge throughout and understanding? Yeah, I think it is. Have we got extended chains of argument? Yeah, even those howevers are quite long. And actually, some students might not be able to write this much. They need to practice writing faster, really, because this is a 12 marker. So I think we've got 5 chains of argument there. Is it balanced? Is it wide-ranging? Well, yeah, we did the description of that earlier. We've done quant and we've done qual. The only problem, really, I think, and you can disagree on a postcard if you still remember what a stamp is, then that is abstract waffle, even though it sounds all right, and it repeats. So realistically, is it level 4? I think so, but if I was marking this, I would go, I'd probably give it 9 out of 12. Okay, to get it up further than that, I would be expecting this not to be a repeat and actually more in context with the real environment that's in the case, the competitive environment that's in the case study linked to expansion. So hopefully that was useful. Remember, the examiners have got a 2-mark leeway. If someone said that this was 11, I think they would be wrong, but they would be fine on appeals on the results day. I don't think this would go down to level 3, but if it did go down 2 marks, then it's still within that window. Hopefully that was useful, and have a good day. Keep up with the news, eh?